You're listening to the VSL podcast. I'm your host, Seth Lake, and this is episode 1. Thanks for listening. Well, first of all, really, thank you for listening. I know there are a lot of podcasts out there, especially a lot of aviation podcasts, and your time is valuable, so I appreciate you spending a little bit of it with me. First off, let me tell you a little bit about VSL. We are a multi-engine flight school located in Central Arkansas. We're pretty small, and we stay focused on the multi-engine rating. We also do some advanced training like commercial instrument instructor, CFII, MEI. We offer quite a few courses. Not a lot of primary training. We have 5 multi-engine trainers and only 1 single-engine trainer. So we kind of stay focused on that twin market, and we really love the Beechcraft. We fly Beechcraft Bonanzas, Barons, and the Travel Air, of course. We've got 5 beautiful Beechcraft Travel Airs that we do our training in. So that's a little bit about our company. My wife and I run it. We've got several employees here, a few full-time instructors, a few contract instructors, and we have a great time. Everybody that comes here, I think, has a wonderful experience, and that's really our big focus. So a little bit about me. I started VSL with my wife about 6 years ago. We went full-time into it after I got out of the Air Force full-time. I was in the Air Force for about 13 years, active duty. I'm still in the Air Force, flying the C-130 in the reserves, but I do that on a part-time basis. So I run the school full-time now. I do some pilot services as well. I manage a couple of King Airs, maybe looking into getting into the jet world maybe. But right now I'm just kind of a props guy. I'm also a designated pilot examiner, so I give a lot of the check rides at our school here at in VSL. So that's a little bit about me. The reason I want to start a podcast is I've done some shows with Max Trescott. I've done some shows with some other smaller podcasts, but mainly Max, and I've gotten a lot of really good feedback from customers on that. And I kind of wanted to go out on my own and see if I could start a podcast that's focused maybe a little bit different than what Max is focused on, more along the lines of check ride preparation and just kind of the day in the life of a flight school type deal. So we'll see how it goes. This is not my first time I've started a podcast. I started one called Go No Go Aviation. You might have listened to that. It was only like 3 or 4 episodes. But I'm at a point now where I have a little extra time during the week, and I feel like I can dedicate a couple extra hours a week to doing a podcast. And my first series, I've decided, is going to be on the Airman Certification Standards. And this is coming from a DPE's perspective. Something that I notice when I go into these check rides is a lot of applicants aren't really familiar or as familiar as they should be on the Airman Certification Standards. And I understand it to some point because really when you're learning how to fly, you're using the Airplane Flying Handbook, the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, and your instructor is giving you a lot of one-on-one ground school and really on flying the airplane. And you're not talking a lot about the ACS. But as you get closer to the practical test, the check ride, you really need to read through the ACS because that is the key to having a successful experience in whatever check ride you're doing, be it private pilot or instrument, commercial, CFI, all of that. The key is knowing how to read the ACS. And I think the ACS is a little, maybe a little intimidating, maybe a little confusing. If you don't know how it's laid out, I think a lot of instructors just hand you the ACS and say, hey, read this. And they don't have a lot of explanations for how to read that. So that's what we're going to do is I'm going to go through blow by blow. We'll probably break it up into several series. We're right at 4 minutes now. I want to keep these around 30 minutes probably in length. So whatever we can cover in 30 minutes. And we're going to go through starting with the private pilot ACS. We're going to go through private pilot instrument commercial. Maybe by the time I get to CFI, they will have released the CFI ACS. But right now the CFI is in a PTS format, and we'll talk about all that when the time comes. So without drawing this out too much longer, I'm going to get straight into it. So if you want to read along with me, if you use ForeFlight, which I'll definitely do a few episodes on ForeFlight. I'm a huge ForeFlight proponent. But ForeFlight in its documents section also it gives you access to the private instrument and commercial Airman Certification Standards. So all you have to do to find that is go to ForeFlight, open up the app and select Documents, and then select the FAA folder, and then select the Handbook folder. And in the Handbook, you're going to see ACS at the very top. So you can download whichever ACS that you're going to be working on, and you can kind of go through this with me. You can also find it, I'll try to put it on the show notes. You can just Google, which is the FAA's official search engine. You can Google Private Pilot Airman Certification Standards, and it should take you directly to the FAA website that has the latest change. So I'm here at page 1. This is what the cover of the ACS looks like. We're Private Pilot Airplane Airman Certification Standards. This one's June 2018. They do change from time to time, so it's important to keep those updated. Now, as we click through this, I'm just going to kind of talk about each page. Acknowledgements and forwards, probably not real important. You can read through those, but there's nothing that is anything for you to write home about in the forward. And the revision history just kind of gives you an idea of when this stuff was revised and where we're at. Records of change, again, that's more of an admin, legalese type stuff. We really haven't gotten into any meat yet. Major enhancements, sure, here's some major enhancements that they've added. That might be good to read through. Again, not using that a whole lot. Here we go, table of contents, really useful because these are also hyperlinked. So I can just click on a section and it'll take me right there. So that's the table of contents is pretty useful. So let's go back to that table of contents. And this is where we're first going to see kind of the general structure of the ACS. So the ACS, in a large part, is broken into two separate things. Your areas of operations and your tasks. So your areas of operations, those are the broad categories. So for instance, area of operation 1 is pre-flight preparation. So that's kind of your chapter title, is pre-flight preparation. Then inside of that area of operation, you have the specific tasks. So one of the tasks of area of operation 1 is task A, which is pilot qualification. So that's where we're actually going to start the check ride. As a DPE, I'm going to start area of operation 1, task A, pilot qualification. So that's kind of the basic structure of how this is laid out. I can see that in my table of contents. I have area operation 1, and then they're in Roman numerals, right? I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Don't know what happened there. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So I have 12 areas of operations in the private pilot ACS. Now, one of these, Area 10, is multi-engine operations. So if you're not doing a multi-engine check ride, you're not going to have to do Area of Operation 10. It doesn't apply to you. Furthermore, there's some things inside of Area of Operations, like Area Operation 9, which is your emergency procedures. There's a few tasks in there that are only airplane multi-engine or airplane multi-engine land or airplane multi-engine sea. And the code that you're looking for there, it's an acronym, is a AMEL or AMES. If you see that in parentheses, that means that task is only applicable to multi-engine aircraft. Now, most people are going to be taking the ASEL, airplane single-engine land, as their private pilot initial. So that's the tasks that you're going to focus on as a single-engine pilot, is the airplane single-engine land or airplane single-engine sea. So you can see, you can kind of go through with a highlighter and just highlight all the tasks that you think you're going to need to accomplish in the table of contents and use that for reference. Right now, we're going to skip straight to pre-flight preparation. We're going to go through Area of Operation 1 real quick. We're going to go through all the tasks, and then I'm going to give you some other things to know about in the Appendix section of the ACS that are going to help you understand it a little bit further. So here in pre-flight preparation, our first task is pilot qualifications. Now this is the first task that we've looked at, so let's dissect the task. The task is broken up into several different parts, but really three important parts, which are knowledge, risk management, and skills. Those are the three broad categories in every task of the ACS. Now the knowledge category is kind of self-explanatory. That's the knowledge that you need to have regarding this task. So for pilot qualifications, one of the pieces of knowledge we needed to know is certification requirements, recent flight experience, and record keeping. Okay, that's kind of vague, but we can read into it a little bit and know that, all right, one of our knowledge in regards to pilot qualification, or one of the items of knowledge in regards to pilot qualifications that we need to have is what do we need to maintain our certification? What do we need to put in our logbook? And what's recency? What recent flight experience is required by a private pilot? So that's an example of a knowledge category. The next is risk management. Risk management is, again, self-explanatory, but it's how do you correlate the level of risk associated with a particular task? How do you correlate that with a real-world scenario? So one of the first example it gives is failure to distinguish proficiency versus currency. So that's probably a question that I'll ask in the check ride is, what does proficiency versus currency mean to you? Because in the previous knowledge, you're going to tell me, well, in order to be current, I need to have 3 takeoffs and 3 landings in category and class in the previous 90 days. So I'll maybe give you a scenario where, okay, let's say you just have the minimum. You're legally current and you have 3 takeoffs and 3 landings and you're ready to go take this long cross country and you haven't flown in 3 months and you just went out and you took the airplane up solo, you did 3 takeoffs, 3 landings, now you're ready to load the wife and the kids in the back and go on your cross country. Now legally, you can do that, right? You've done your 3 takeoffs and landings, you're current, you have your flight review, let's say you've got your flight review up to date in the past 2 years or 24 months. So does that mean you're safe? And most people would answer, probably not. If I haven't flown that much, probably need to get maybe with an instructor or maybe do some smaller cross-country flights leading up to that big one. Proficiency is going to mean different things for different people depending on how you're flying, how often you're flying, what you're flying. Proficiency is a little bit harder to put our finger on, but currency is pretty easy. It's 3 takeoffs, 3 landings in 90 days. So part of risk management is distinguishing the difference between proficiency and currency. All right, this next element is skills. So the skill element is really the meat of the ACS, is the skills, because as a DPE, I'm required to evaluate an applicant on all of the skills listed in a task. I only have to evaluate at least one knowledge topic and at least one risk management area, but I have to do all of the skills. So as a DPE, I have to write up kind of a customized plan of action for each applicant that takes a check ride with me. So what that means is when you schedule a check ride with me, I'm going to get some information from you, like your FTN, and I'm going to be able to look up in the system on the questions that you missed on your written exam, if you missed any. I'm going to take those missed questions and I'm going to highlight those in the ACS, and I'm going to make sure I evaluate each of those questions that you missed. The other thing I'm going to do is give you some sort of scenario, and it might be a basic scenario. Well, it is a basic scenario for myself. I'll tell you to plan a cross-country from point A to point B VFR with a couple of passengers that weigh a specific weight and some baggage that weighs a specific weight, and I'll tell you, plan a fuel stop if needed. If we need to make adjustments in the weight and balance, we'll discuss that, but plan to bring as much of the cargo and or passengers as possible in order to make our flight happen. So, in other words, if I tell you to go from point A to point B and we really can't make it with the number of passengers that I gave you, I don't want you to show up the day of the check ride and say, well, we're not going to do the flight because I couldn't fit Bob in the back. He weighs too much, so we're just not going to fly. I didn't plan anything. Well, I don't want you to do that. I want you to say, well, we can't do the flight with Bob, or we can't do the flight with the planned cargo, so we're going to have to ask them to stay behind and drive, or we can bring them, and we're going to have to add an extra fuel stop because now we can't carry enough fuel to make either the nonstop flight or make it to our pre-planned fuel stop. We're going to have to add in another one. So I want some sort of analysis like that done. But in giving that scenario, the first thing I'm going to ask is, okay, well, on your flight to Destin today, for instance, we're going to fly to Destin today. I own the airplane, and I ask you to fly me to Destin in my airplane, and you're a private pilot, and I tell you, hey, Shane, I I want you to fly me to Destin, and I'm going to cover all the costs. You don't have to worry about anything. I want to help you on your way to get your instrument and commercial, so I just want you to fly me there in my airplane. But I know you're not a commercial pilot, so I'm not going to pay you anything. I just want you to fly my airplane. So that may be how I start the scenario. And some of you might be smiling because hopefully you recognize that may be something we need to discuss further. I said that I would pay for the full cost of the flight, and as a private pilot, you really can't do that. That would be seen as the FAA as being compensated for your flight. So you really need to address that and say, well, Seth, I appreciate you being willing to pay for everything, but as a private pilot, I can't accept you paying the full amount. I would love to fly with you to Destin for the experience. It would be great, but I'm going to need to pay my pro rata share of the flight, which means your equal part of the flight, splitting up the fuel and the rental, any landing fees, anything associated with that flight. I'm going to have to pay my pro rata share. So in that case, if I'm going to pay my pro rata share, hey, we're good to go. We can go ahead and make that flight in many cases. So that's the first part of the conversation. So I kind of built that question into a scenario type format. So after you answer that correctly, I might say, okay, well, very good. You're gonna do the pro rata share split, so you're not being compensated, and you're legal to do this under your privileges as a private pilot. Now, in order to be current to do this mission, what do you have to have? The correct answer being, well, I need to have 3 takeoffs and landings in previous 90 days in category and class and a current flight review. I'm also going to have my class 3 medical or above. I can also use basic med. If I've held a class 3 medical in the past, I can go over and start using basic med, so I could do that. I'm also going to need a valid government photo ID. So those are some basic answers that I'm looking for, and it's kind of built in that scenario. So once I'm done asking those questions, and see how the skill is apply requirements to act as PIC under visual flight rules in a scenario given by the evaluator. So that was kind of a direction to me as the DPE. That skill, the scenario that I just gave you of flying from point A to point B with a passenger in an airplane, that's how I evaluated that. That was the scenario that I gave. And many DPEs are going to use something really similar to that to evaluate skill number 1. So now that we've gone from that, I might say, okay, well, we've agreed on terms that make you qualified to fly this mission. So now we have to make sure the airplane's airworthy. So talk me through the process of how you're going to make sure an airplane that maybe you don't have real intimate knowledge of, how are you going to go out and determine if that airplane is airworthy? So in this airworthiness and requirements task, we have a few more knowledge areas to know about, how to find airworthiness directives, how to find the airworthiness certificate and the registration. Pilot perform preventative maintenance. Might ask you knowledge on that. Inoperative equipment discovered prior to flight. That's a risk management, so you can expect a DPE to ask something about inoperative equipment. And then the skills: locate and describe airworthiness registration, determine if the airplane is airworthy in a given scenario, and apply appropriate procedures for operating with inoperative equipment. So what this scenario is going to look like is we're going to take our Destin example that we're already working in this scenario, right? And I'm going to say, well, you walk out to the airplane, right? You verified all the logbooks are good. Here's the time where I'll probably pull out the logbooks for the plane we're going to use that day, and I'm going to have you show me where are all the required logbook entries for the maintenance. Where is the airworthiness and registration located? The weight and balance for the airplane. All those aero documents, I'll have you find all those. Next, I'll say, okay, now you go out and you pre-flight the airplane. And as you start to pre-flight the airplane, you notice maybe let's see, I don't want to give away all my secrets. Let's think of something that's inoperative. Let's say you find some undocumented damage on the wingtip of this 172 you're about to go fly. Maybe a crack in the fiberglass over there. So you have some sort of damage that you found on the walk around. How are you going to handle that as a pilot? What's the process for you to address damage discovered during a pre-flight inspection? I'll probably give you some sort of pass, after I hear how you're going to handle that, I'll say, okay, maintenance comes out, they do a fix on that, or they say that it's within tolerance, and the AMPIA says, hey, you're good to go on the flight. So you get in the airplane and you crank it up, and as soon as you crank it up, you realize that the COM2 nav2, your COM nav2 radio is not working at all. It doesn't work. You flip the switch on, nothing comes on. So can we still fly? Is that something that's safe to do? What actions do we have to take as pilot in command to fly with inoperative equipment? So that's going to be kind of the scenario. Again, without giving you exact what I'm going to ask during the check ride, it'll be something like that. So because the ACS is written the way it is, as an applicant, no matter what DPE you go to, they're going to ask about flying with inoperative equipment. They're going to give you some sort of scenario and have you determine, is the plane airworthy based on that scenario. And they're going to ask you to find airworthiness and registration documentation for the airplane, because those are the 3 skills we have to do for airworthiness. All right, next, weather. I'll say, okay, now we've got a good airplane. We're pre-flighted. We're good to go. We know the plane is going to make the flight. There's no issues there. Now we need to analyze the weather between our 2 airports and make a determination, and is the weather going to allow us to make VFR flight? So I may ask, hey, what's your process? What's your process for analyzing the weather for cross country? A lot of folks use ForeFlight. I love ForeFlight. If your process is to use ForeFlight, then please come prepared to show me how you use that amazing program to help you analyze the weather and figure out if it's safe to do it in VFR conditions. So you can see you've got several skills here related to weather. All right, you've got some risk management items related to weather. And then your skills, this is our first skill that throws us a little bit of a curveball. Skill 1 is use available aviation resources to obtain an adequate weather briefing. Okay, well, ForeFlight has a briefing function. That fulfills the requirement for that. So if you know how to pull up a weather briefing in ForeFlight, perfect. If you're going to call 1-800-WEATHER-BRIEF or go to 1-800-WEATHERBRIEF.com, perfect. That fulfills that requirement. The next requirement is you have to analyze the implications of at least 3 of the conditions listed in the knowledge area using the actual weather or a weather given to you in a scenario. So it actually is kind of a circular logic where the main ACS says, hey, I have to do 1 knowledge topic, 1 risk management topic, and all the skills. Well, this skill is telling me I have to do 3 knowledge topics. So we kind of reference back up here, and we're going to have to analyze 3 of these knowledge areas that are listed in the weather. And then we're going to need to correlate the information to make a competent go-no-go decision on our flight. A lot of times I'm just using the weather that you have that day. So some days it's really easy. Some days we're going to have a longer discussion, and it may lead to, well, we can't really make this flight safely today. In any case, we're going to analyze at least 3 topics up here. Now, if you're a little rusty on these topics, the resource or references guide up here at the top gives you the AC00-6. That's a really important advisory circular. It has a lot of good weather information, and I suggest any pilot review that before taking a check ride, because that's probably the best place to learn about weather conditions. And you can actually just word search wind or temperature, moisture, precipitation. And that advisory circular is going to have a lot of information on that. So that's how we're doing the weather part. Next, cross-country flight planning. We're going to skip straight down here to the skills. So you're going to have to prepare and present and explain a cross-country flight plan all the way to the first fuel stop. So you're going to have some sort of nav log to show me, and you're going to have to be able to explain how that nav log was created, either by hand by you, or if you're going to use ForeFlight, you're going to have to show me how ForeFlight generates that navigation log. You're going to have to apply appropriate current aeronautical charts, supplements, NOTAMs for the airport, runway and taxi closures, and other flight publications. So you're going to have a plan to be able to first check for all of those NOTAMs, and then have them listed out in your navigation log. Create a navigation plan and simulate filing a VFR flight plan. by far the most missed item on the ground is people not having, or applicants not having, a VFR flight plan ready to go. You need to have that VFR flight plan filled out and ready to hit file on, because I want to see that you know how to do that. And then recalculate fuel reserves based on a scenario provided by the evaluator. So I may, this is all going to be based on our scenario from point A to point B, and I may say, well, in your search for the NOTAMs, you realize that your planned fuel stop has a closed runway. And that's going to force you to find a different airport to do a fuel stop at, and you're going to have to change your fuel log slightly and recalculate your reserves based on that change of plans. So that's how that's going to go. Our next is our National Airspace System. Notice that the not as many knowledge items, kind of pretty broad, but there are some special use airspace references in the SFRA. Be prepared to talk about the special use airspace, the SFRAs, and the TFRs, especially if you live in an area that's near a SFRA. We can look up Part 93 for any stuff regarding the SFRA. And you can see that that's a reference up here, Part FAR, Part 93. Various classes and types of airspaces are risk management items. That's a pretty broad statement. And then for the skill area, we need to identify and comply with VFR weather minimums, correctly identify airspace, and then identify requirements for operating within an SUA or TFR, and comply with SATR or SFRA operations. So I typically have people fly down to Destin as their destination. That's kind of a relatively local airport, and it has an SFRA that we can talk about with special operations. So we're going to plan a mission to, or for the check ride purposes, I'm going to have you plan a cross country to a location that has those SFRAs. Next is performance and limitations. Again, straight down to the skills. We're going to have to compute a weight and balance and correct for an outer center of gravity problem. Then we're also going to utilize appropriate charts and tables for performance data. So that's two things that we're going to have to do in regards to performance and limitations. Again, we have the knowledge topics and then a couple of risk management items that we're going to have to know as well. Next, operations of systems. Again, straight to the bottom for the skills. Operate at least 3 of the systems listed up here. So we have to know how to operate 3 of the systems listed in our knowledge topic area, just like the weather. Remember, the weather pointed us back up to the knowledge and said, hey, we have to know how to do 3. So make sure you know how to use all these systems. And then use appropriate checklists properly. Well, that's pretty straightforward. Just make sure you're using checklists. We're probably going to talk about some sort of emergency procedures in this section, because that gives me an idea of how you use the checklist properly, knowledge of the systems, and also being able to detect and manage systems malfunctions, which is one of the risk management items listed in this ACS. And that last for us is going to be human factors. Human factors, again, here it's going to list us back up where we have to figure out, where we have to associate symptoms of 3 of the items listed in the knowledge area as part of our skill, and then perform a self-assessment. So basically, what's your process for performing a self-assessment? And then the human factors stuff we talk about, I might give you some sort of scenario within our scenario of, you're feeling symptoms of hypoxia, or you're feeling symptoms of carbon monoxide poisoning, or give you some sort of scenario that what I want you to do is recognize that this is a scenario that I might be susceptible to spatial disorientation. Maybe it's a night takeoff from a dark runway. That would be a specific scenario where I would be really susceptible to that spatial disorientation. So that's how I'm going to handle that. And then the last one, task I, that's for water seaplane characteristics. So unless you're taking your private pilot in a seaplane aircraft, you're not going to have to cover that. And then we're on to Area of Operation 2, pre-flight procedures. So we just went through Area of Operation 1, pre-flight preparation, and we did all of the tasks that are applicable there. So that's kind of how that works. That's how the ACS works. And I gave you kind of a behind-the-scenes look of how I'm designing a scenario that's going to assess all of the required skill, knowledge, and risk management topics for each task there. And as we go through the ACS, the meat, again, I said this before, the meat of the ACS is all of these areas of operation. So we go through that. We're going to go through these individually, but I'm going to skip to the end here and talk a little bit about the appendix, because we're going to use this in later episodes, and I just want you to have an idea, maybe when you're looking at this on your own time, of what this appendix actually means. What are things in here that are useful to you? What can you kind of not ignore, but just doesn't really matter to 9 out of 10 people? So in the appendix, Appendix 1 is the knowledge and test eligibility prerequisites. It's listing this stuff. You might use this with your CFI, but really not a lot of useful information here. Maybe before you're going into take your written exam or your test, you can read through this, but I'm not using this a lot of times. Knowledge tests, procedures and tips kind of gives you an idea of what you need to bring in when you're going to go take your written exam, what you can bring in for your practical test. Knowledge test report. The only thing I'd point out here is the kind of the secret decoder ring of an ACS item saying that PA, that's the applicable ACS, and then the area of operation, and then the task, and then the element. So that's the ACS, area of operation, task, and element. That's what we've been talking about this whole time. That's how you can kind of reference those specifically. Here we get to eligibility prerequisites. Again, we don't care about that. Roles and responsibilities. What I'll point out here is this is going to give you your responsibilities, your instructor's responsibilities, and then my responsibilities as an examiner, or whoever your examiner happens to be. Right down here, the minimum elements required for a plan of action are at least one knowledge element, at least one risk management element, and all skill elements, and any task elements in which the applicant was shown to be deficient in the knowledge test. So I talked about that before, where I'm going to get your FTN before we meet. I'm going to get all of the missed questions from your test, and I'm going to add that to my area of operation, or my plan of action there. It talks about your 3 possible outcomes of the test there as well. And then we get into the checklist. This checklist is, I reference this to everybody that schedules a check ride with me. Everybody likes to ask, hey, what do I need to bring to my check ride? This checklist is it. It has everything you need to bring. If you show up with everything complete on this checklist, you're going to at least be qualified and prepared to take the check ride. And it's going to make everything go a lot smoother. These are the additional task table elements. So these are really important if you're going to add on to an existing rating. So the example I'll have, because this is the one we run into the most, is you go out and you get your single engine private pilot check ride done. So now you're a single engine private pilot. You're certified. You got your certificate in the mail. You're good to go. You've been flying for a couple of years, and you decide, hey, I want to go visit this VSL place, and I want to get my multi-engine add-on. So when you come to take our multi-engine training course and take our multi-engine check ride, this multi-engine additional task table is going to tell you what skill elements you have to do in the check ride. So you don't have to repeat the entire private pilot check ride. You only have to do certain things. So the way we use this is, first, we make sure we're on the right table. Addition of an airplane multi-engine land to an existing private pilot certificate. Yep, that's us. So we look, hey, we hold an airplane single-engine land rating. So for area of operation 1, we have to do items F and G. For 2, we have to do A, B, C, D, F. We don't have to do any of 3. Area of operation 3, we don't have to do any of 6. We don't have to do any of 8. And then our 11 and 12 we don't have to do any of. Some of them we have to do all. Some of them we have to do specific tasks in there. So you can kind of use this in conjunction with the table of contents listed that we talked about before, and kind of go through and just highlight each item that you're going to have to do. And now going into the training, hey, here's the items that I'm expected to show proficiency in. Now remember, this is just the minimum items. We could, or you might be asked to do other items in the ACS. That's an option. It's just this is the minimum required to show proficiency during a check ride. All right, so we're going to go through this. Now our safety of flight. Appendix 6 is all about, hey, here's some things that we might do differently than what the ACS says. We might edit those depending on the type of airplane we're flying. So an example is multi-engine considerations, where it's giving us specific altitudes for us to do these maneuvers. Or in the case of a multi, we're not going to fail any engines below 400 feet AGL. We're not going to shut down any engines below 3,000 feet. And we're not going to fail any engines on the runway above 50% of the calculated VMC. So those are specific multi-engine considerations that aren't listed in the ACS and kind of the meat of that area of operation or task, but it's listed back here in the safety of flight appendix. Also for single engine reasons, if you're using a, let's see, we will not request a simulated power plant failure in a single engine airplane unless it is possible to safely complete a landing. All right, so we're not going to fail your engine over downtown Dallas because we just can't safely complete a landing. So that means we're going to do it over an uninhabited area, or preferably over some sort of runway where you can actually affect an engine failure landing. And then in high performance, it says in some high performance airplanes, we might have to reduce the power for a power on stall to avoid a pitch attitude greater than 30 degrees nose up. This is one that I've seen missed a couple times, where I go in and I fly with somebody, let's say they're taking a check ride in a bigger 182 or a Bonanza, both high performance airplanes, and they use full power on the power on stall, and we're just standing the airplane on the tail trying to get it to stall. That's kind of an unsafe, or that is an unsafe situation to put yourself into in a non-aerobatic airplane. So what the ACS is saying is, hey, we're allowing you to reduce the power to something other than maximum power to make sure that you don't get over 30 degrees of pitch attitude during the power on stall. Appendix 7, this is probably the most important one in the appendix, is it's telling you here's what your aircraft that you're supplying or using for the check ride needs to be capable of. So it's important to review all of these, because this is going to add some edits to the aircraft that you're using and maybe the specific requirements for that area of operation. So for instance, performance and ground reference maneuvers. The evaluator must choose at least one maneuver for the applicant to demonstrate: a rectangular course, S-turns, or turns around a point. I have to choose one of those. So maneuvering during slow flight, it's giving me the specific grading criteria I have to use as an evaluator to do that. Power on stalls, power off stalls, they're all listed there. Those are really good things for you to know as an applicant going in. And so Appendix 7, really important appendix for you to read through and understand. Appendix 8, let's go over there. Use of flight simulators. If you're going to use a flight simulator for a check ride, that's pretty uncommon, especially for the private commercial instrument. Most of the time we get into using a simulator or a device for a check ride, it's in the ATP realm. But it does list some stuff that you have to have if you're going to do a portion of or all of the check ride in a flight training device. Again, pretty uncommon. And then it lists our references, abbreviations. And that's it. So next episode, I will cover area of operation 2 and maybe even 3. And we're just going to kind of keep doing this. Feel free to leave some comments if you're finding this on Facebook or wherever. I'll list my email. You can reach out to me at seth@vsl.aero, and that's AERO. If you've got any questions, if you've got any suggestions on what you would like covered in the podcast from a DPE's perspective, or even an instructor's perspective, let me know, and I'll figure that in there as well. But we're right at 40-minute mark. I went about 10 minutes over. Sorry about that. We'll see how it goes next time. Hopefully I can keep it to 30 without the long intro. But again, thank you for listening, and look forward to talking with